Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be sitting here with Tammy through the internet. Tammy Chow of Somatic Spirit. She's a somatic guide and helps women move through trauma and other challenges in their life through the facilitation of somatic therapy. Tammy, welcome to Ritual of Wild.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to chat and muse with you.
Me too. So I want to share with my audience how I intersected with Tammy. Funny story, I was perusing my email, and I'm one of those people that have like way too many emails that have not been tended to in my inbox that need to be deleted. And Tammy's email made it into my inbox, and this must have been something I subscribed to in the past, because obviously how else would your email make it into my inbox? But I was not aware that the contents of it was something that is exactly what I needed in that moment. And also, I rarely open emails that I'm not totally familiar with, but for some reason I felt called to open yours, Tammy. What it spoke to was this podcast interview you shared with your friend Jen about God and Mary Magdalene and just the wild nature of women. And it was so powerful and impactful that I was like, I gotta connect with this woman. She's brilliant. And I just loved your honesty and transparency and just like the raw edge you brought to that conversation about your own personal experience. So that's how I intersected with Tammy. And I would love it if you could share a bit about yourself and how somatics came into your life.
Thank you, Jenny. I'd love to talk more about our Magdalene journeys too today. I feel like I haven't really talked about that much in conversations, and I feel like it would be fun to talk about where you are in that book as well.
Yes.
But about myself, I grew up with quite a lot of trauma, even if my parents are both, I think, first generation. No, I'm first generation because I was born here first. And so both my parents immigrated here. And when I was younger, it was the typical immigrant story of both parents are working. My dad is an alcoholic. And just from a very young age, I was kind of adulting. I was taking care of that and kind of managing all of this emotional responsibility. And to my 4-year-old self, I thought like survival responsibility, thinking that it was my job to save my dad or monitor my dad's drinking. And I didn't receive a lot of the relational, secure attachment that I needed. I don't think I received much of that at all. And a lot of my youth was kind of spent navigating the waters of sexual trauma and body dysmorphia, bulimia, extreme self-criticism and hatred, feeling like I was doing that all alone and in my own internal hell. And all of that history, and eventually leading to, I said history and then Siri popped in on my computer. Not you, Siri, history. All of that history kind of led me to a place where I had no choice but to start healing, because my body, just through physical symptoms, like I couldn't keep food down anymore. I was in college and I couldn't even keep food down, and it was really scarring of an experience to try to, after having left fashion school and monitored a lot of my eating with Vyvanse, which was like the new Adderall at the time. And then going into my first job, work setting, food is such a connected activity. It's a place where you connect and you bond over meals. And I was fresh out of college and I really wanted to bond with my team, but I found myself, doing things like leaving for my hour lunch break and just like walking loops around New York City just to avoid having to eat in front of my team. And I think that was just a really, really sad time in my life, because there was just so much of myself that was hidden, and so many interesting ways that I would hide my addiction, my bulimia, and my internal world from people. On the outside, I was very charismatic and gregarious and kind of people pleasing and the good girl. And, I just knew how to make everybody like me, be this, the center of attention at parties. And then, what was really happening inside was the total opposite. It was complete, just no self-esteem, like the opposite of self-esteem, self-hatred, and punishing my body through food and drugs and alcohol, and all of that kind of brought me to needing to heal. And luckily ending up at a PCP who was in my network, covered by my work at the time. She was just starting to move over into holistic medicine. And because at the time, my entire history was going to normal Western medical doctors and them telling me, your bloating's normal, your suicidal ideation is normal, all of these things are normal. And I really do feel like it was a godsend, Victoria Albina, that she was the first nurse practitioner to ask, so what's your relationship like with your father? And I was 21 at the time, like shaking in the doctor's office, like, why are you asking me this? How is this even related? Give me pills, heal my ulcer symptoms, all this stuff. And that really set me on the path of, well, I needed to cut out drinking and drugs, and that was really hard. But I started going to acupuncture and taking traditional Chinese medicine tincture, and suddenly I had so much free time being sober and depressed. And luckily at that time, a friend's mom, she turned me on to Spirit Junkie from Gabrielle Bernstein.
Yes.
And then after that, and that's when I started noticing synchronicities, and I was on my path, in the middle of Brook. Oh no, I'm echoing again. Okay. I was on my kind of healing path in the middle of Brooklyn and starting to run into people and things that would start changing the trajectory of my life from a downward spiral. And the next book that some person I met, because I went into a Tribeca jazz bar one night and I just had the best conversation with him. He told me to read The Power of Now. And that's when Sir Eckhart Tolle and his teachings of opening up to spirit and mindfulness and everything really started. I felt a little crazy, because it was so far from my reality. But obviously it was speaking to a really young place in me that I knew at one point in my life. And so from there, that was that really kick-started maybe 7 years of my healing journey, healing through food and nutrition, and starting to look at my shadows and reshape my habits. And then really during the pandemic and during a 6-year relationship that I thought was going to be forever, and I thought that it was going to be my future family, it wasn't. And I had to, I think, I don't know, just everything was coming up around that time, and I was really projecting a lot of my childhood pain out on my partner, and it all came up in this huge flurry of this dark night of the soul when 6 years in, and now we're having the conversation of kids, and now I'm finding out that that might not be, we're not in alignment on that, and different triggers coming up like porn, and that sending me into my 16-year-old body dysmorphia spirals, or all of my spirals of comparing myself to the popular white girls growing up in Texas. And I was just in this hell of oh my God, I've done all of this work. What is happening? Why am I having suicidal thoughts again? Why am I just in this trapped spinning out cycle of hating myself all over again? And I think at that time, that's when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score and Waking the Tiger, and my Vedic astrologer, he is a sassy gay man, and he tells it to me straight. And he was like, I think you need a different kind of therapy. He's like, you're not going to just like tap. Like, he's like, you justified throwing up your food for 10 years of your life. And I was like, yeah, because at that time I had healed all of my eating stuff, but I hadn't really addressed all of the root causes of it. And he
Mm.
put me in touch with a somatic therapist. And from there, everything started to unravel and change through that process of somatic therapy for me, much more so than just, sometimes people think it's just about like chewing on the past over and over again. But that's like part of it. That's the entryway point. But what it opened me up to was just like deepening into my intuition, my voice, a felt sense
Mhm.
of connection with my ancestors through my body to kind of start guiding me on my path and what was next and what my purpose is here to do. Healing a lot of that shame and pain of growing up in a very white upbringing and having a bit of an identity confusion crisis my entire life, and really disowning the parts of me that are Chinese, and needing to heal a lot of that in order to now be where I'm at, which is teaching the medicine of somatics, which can be traced back to all kinds of shamanic practices and indigenous practices in every culture. For me personally, I think I really connect it all back to Taoism, Buddhism, a lot of the Indian mystical
Mysticism.
tradition. Yeah, exactly. And it feels like such a homecoming, even if I wasn't born in China, but it's like it's in my bones. It's where I come from. And yeah, so that's kind of how I was led to somatics, and that's the long answer.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Such vulnerability and tender parts of your upbringing. And like, there's so much you said that I'm like taking note of in my head. And one of the first things you mentioned that I wanted to circle back to was just naming that you were taking this on at 4 years old, which
Mm.
is so wild. And I myself am a clinical somatic therapist student, and one of the first modules we explore is the impact of the world we experience from 0 to 3 years old through the lens of our caregivers, and just how that sets the precedent for so much of how we perceive the world.
Mm.
And I remember listening to this podcast once, and I can't remember the host, but he was interviewing a man named James Hollis, who's like this brilliant writer and explores relationship. And one of the things he said that always sticks with me, especially as a parent, and hearing from you as someone that's evolved from the experience of being 4 years old and having the imprint of taking something so big like that on, was that the biggest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of a parent.
Mm.
And I just really, I think about that now today as a parent, as well as, how do my choices and my experience of the world impact my kids' experience of the world. And so the reason I bring this up is because it's so powerful to hear you and witness you share the story of how you were able to transcend that in so many ways through all the different intersections of your healing. So I'm wondering for you how it feels to hear a quote like that, and downstream, like, I don't know if you want to be a mama, but does that resonate with you, or does it feel heavy to hear still, or what comes up as you
Mm.
receive that?
Yeah. Can you repeat the quote?
The greatest weight a child can bear is the unlived life of a parent. And
Yeah.
I will say in naming that quote that, like, it doesn't have to figuratively be like the unlived life of a parent, but perhaps maybe the things that they could not be aware of in their lifetime, that they weren't able to
Hmm.
live to the fullness of, what life may have potentially had in store or not. But that's
Yeah.
how I receive that.
Yeah. I think it's both a burden and there can be blessings. But yeah, the burden was real. And I feel like I suffered a lot from what I didn't get. And of course, they did their best, but the weight of thinking that, of being able to be so empathetic at such a young age, and to be able to see my parents' highest selves almost, right? We always want to see our parents' highest selves, and we project that. We're like, I know what you could be and do, and so let
Hmm.
me take it upon myself to get you there, you know? And you spend a lifetime trying to do that. And then I've done a lot of family constellations therapy as well,
Hmm.
and that kind of factors into the ways that I work with people. But if you think about each generation, like we all want to be facing forward down the generational line. Like my ancestors want to be giving blessings so that each generation has something to make the next generation better. And
Hmm.
that's the natural flow of life. And I think when you don't understand that as a kid, what happens is then we spend a lot of our lives facing back upwards towards our family line, all the way up to where the trauma originally started. And so then that flow of life is halted within us. Our life force energy isn't spent doing what we're meant to do here and how we're supposed to progress in our life. And that's a huge burden to bear. And, that's something then we pass on as well. And yeah, so I think I agree with that. And it's taken, I always think that I'm done with it. But it just feels like last week with the eclipse, I've finally unhooked the burden. But who knows, like it'll keep unraveling as I age in different spirals. But then Peter Levine talks about this, and Efu, who are both from somatic experiencing. When we heal the trauma of our ancestors and of our parents, we healed 7 generations back and 7 generations
Hmm.
forward. And so, what's exciting then too is we also get to reclaim the resilience, like the
Hmm.
gifts that our ancestors had, right? Not just like, oh, I'm here in this lifetime needing to bear the pain of everything my parents didn't do. But when I do that, I also get to claim, you know, my parents are brilliant business people. They made it from nothing. They always tell me the story of how we drove from New York City to Houston to escape New York when I was 3 years old in a beat up van that they bought for $2,000. And there was no AC, so they had to put an ice pack behind my back every day,
Wow.
in order to keep me cool. And I love that, and so I admire that. And just because there's a lot of pain and trauma there, it's like when I integrate that, I also get to receive the blessings of that. I get to receive the blessings of great great grandmother that I know about now, who was very spiritual, worship Kuan Yin, mystic.
Wow.
I get to reclaim the black sheep who were disowned, who committed suicide on my dad's side because they were a performer or a female escort, and very beautiful, but like looked down upon because she wasn't married
Mm.
by 32. And I get to reclaim those parts, and now I get to do performance, and I get to be the mystic, and I get to be, the woman who builds my own life and my own business on my own terms.
I love that. And I just got chills as you were saying that. And one thing that really stands out for me is just realizing like, you are an ancestor. I am an ancestor in the making. And the course through
Yeah.
which we experience our life now sets the threshold for generations to come. That's just such a huge honor and superpower, and it's so humbling, and there's even like a dose of humility there. And I just love that you named that you also get to claim these beautiful parts and aspects that your parents did bring to the table, and
Mm-hmm.
it's fair to say as we grow, I think our experience of love is to the degree that we allow ourselves to go into our own depths. But if we're not resourced with people or the tools to be able to tap into that, it is really hard, especially for that generation, our generation of parents who are immigrant. My parents immigrated here too, and so
Mm-hmm.
much of their life was let's westernize, let's
Yeah.
bring in the Canadian culture and and that equaled survival. And I think survival meant belonging to that which they surrounded themselves with because they didn't know any better. So I just thank you for putting that so eloquently about bringing it back to, there's both and there's like this hard, ugly side, and there's so much beauty that you get to choose and bring with you along your journey.
Yeah.
The other part that stood out for me when you were speaking was when you hit your 20s and you were saying something like you were starting to awaken to your healing and you had all this time in your hands because you stopped, going to the lifestyle that you had before that. And one thing that came up for me as I was hearing you say that was I want to commend you because in order to evolve, you have to be willing to be still. And I think if people can't know the importance and significance of stillness, and maybe you didn't at the time, but you did it anyway, and then the meaning of it came after, but it's like so much of our culture is in a rush. And another thing I learned from my somatic teacher is urgency is something we're taught. And so to access these parts of us that are, deeply suppressed, or the wisdom that is deeply in our bones, and we crave that growth, we want to heal, and healing can be such a nuanced word because everyone experiences a version of healing that is impactful for them. I guess my point is like, good on you for doing that. And then also naming how that shifted your trajectory as to how you continued that healing path. And I would love for you to speak to that stillness piece because you also mentioned Eckhart Tolle and the Power of Now. I love him so much. I've seen him twice in Vancouver. And A New Earth was my first book that shifted my life, which he wrote. And I was in my 20s as well. So I love that you're saying this because it's like another connecting the dots. So tell me more about the stillness for you and maybe even speak to a bit of Eckhart Tolle's wisdom and how that was medicine for you.
Yeah. It's so funny. That's why I feel like we're connected because you reached out and you're like, oh my God, Mary Magdalene is hitting me right now. And often,
Oh
just
yeah,
like
and
in
we're
your
going to go
podcast,
there.
but just like in my meeting Jenny in my other podcast, talking about God and stuff, we're always like, we check in and we're always like, are you experiencing this? Yeah, me too. Okay, cool. Good to know. And it's
Yeah.
just so beautiful that some people are kind of like on these same wavelengths, and it feels, oh, I just love that. There's just like this built-in community and it's like, I'm just open to when you'll appear in my life or, the next connected person on a similar journey gets placed in my life. Yeah, the stillness piece, I think sometimes, and this is the genius of the body, I think sometimes you're forced into stillness, You hear all these, when my mom had cancer, she's like never been nicer. God willing, it'll stay in remission. But, it feels like it was a wake up call. And that's when we actually started being able to communicate and have a healing journey. And for me, that was manifesting through all the physical ailments that I was having. And so I think at first I was very resistant. I wasn't perfect. I would show up to acupuncture reeking of tequila or whiskey because I'd just been out till 6 a.m. and still, but I went to the appointment, okay? And so that was and
That counts.
unfortunately, and what?
That counts. That matters. You showed
Yeah,
up.
I showed up, and acupuncture forces you to be still because I don't want to be deep, poking myself deeper with needles if I'm not still. And so maybe it was a little bit of forced stillness that I showed up for at first. And maybe it was because I was on the protocol with that diet, just cleaning up my system of everything that I was eating and detoxing from that. That slowly my mind was able, because what we eat and put into our bodies also affect our nervous system and our ability to be present. And so I think I was feeling better. And so of course I was like, well, I'll lean into it more. And then I think Eckhart, the one really profound part in the power of now, he leads you through an exercise of focusing on a flower and starting to sense if you can feel spirit in the flower. And so it's like start by noticing the beauty of the petals, start by noticing the different colors, and
Mm.
then now sense into the energy that is literally holding the stem up. And I remember that part being like, oh my God, how is it holding itself up with that tiny little stem? And that was like, it awakened that felt sense of spirit that I had always been connected to as a kid. But it brought it back, because I feel like from I don't know what age that really the trauma and numbness and escaping happened. If I can trace it back, it really something happened after like a big sexual trauma event happened when I was around 19. But from like 19 to 24, I was like numb, shut out, escaping, partying. But that realization of spirit again woke me up out of that trance. And then I was like walking through the streets of Brooklyn, like looking at the trees, that they like plant inside
Sober.
the concrete. Yeah, but they're all
Yeah.
like just in the concrete block, like one tree. And I'm like, is there spirit in that thing too? Oh my God. What about that one? I started seeing my surroundings so differently, and I had no choice but to be in awe. And then I think awe
Mm.
creates stillness, and then stillness produces more awe. And and then, I became kind of a spirit junkie. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the greatest teachings I got from him was also the art of noticing. And noticing is, I think, such a big part of somatics where you're just noticing.
yeah,
And I'm always saying like just naming and just notice. Like I find myself saying that to my 3-year old even like, where do you
yes.
feel that in your body? And but what Eckhart taught me was like, notice when you're feeling a pain point come up and you hear the story come up in your head and just notice the story. Okay, now you're noticing the story, but who's noticing the story? You know what I mean? And then
Mm-hmm.
I was like I'm starting to have super chills, by the way. I'm just saying that because we started talking about Eckhart and Mary Magdalene, and I feel this is going to sound crazy. I'm going off on a tangent here, but she wants to be brought into the conversation because I'm getting like full chills. And when you were talking about spirit with Eckhart, it was like there's my body feels like it's starting to like buzz, like an
Yeah,
electrifying, like buzzy feeling. But
yeah.
I'll wrap up what I
That's
was saying about
crazy.
Eckhart. Yeah, it is crazy. And I just
Oh, I
love
said
everything.
that's not crazy.
Oh,
That's your intuition.
yeah, it's my intuition. And sometimes that feels crazy. And like, let's just normalize how the notion of descent, like that feeling of being connected with your intuition, does feel like a death. You will feel crazy once you start creating space for that in your life. But also, it's like, it's it's beautiful, and I like whoever's listening, I encourage you to run with it. But to circle
Mm-hmm.
back to what I was saying about Eckhart, when I started noticing that I was noticing, I was like, like there's this like visceral feeling in the body where you're like, okay, there is this egoic self that is creating stories and keeping me where it thinks I need to be, or like validating the belief I've been hanging on to in order to protect myself. And there's also this part of me that's noticing that that's coming up. And this part is so expansive. Like it's not feeling the pain that's coming up. It's just kind of seeing it in the background. And then I'm like, okay, if I go deeper into that, there's like this whole field of like, I don't know, space where we're connected to that space. And when you were saying like you're noticing the trees come out of the cracks on the roads of Brooklyn, I can't tell you how much I've noticed lately, like these beautiful plants that are growing through the cracks of concrete on the sidewalks at this time of year. I don't know why it's happening, or maybe it's always happened and I've just noticed it now. But for me, every time I see it, I'm like, there is so much life in the rubble. There's so much that wants to push through, and you cannot burn the truth down. Like that which wants to birth is going to declare itself, whether you choose
Beautiful.
to meet it in your time or you get hit by a cosmic two by four and then you don't really have a choice but to meet it in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just love everything you riffed on there about what you were noticing because it really echoed just the pertinent part of like we all have access to that, and it's such
Yeah.
a, I think it's miraculous.
Yeah. And thank you for it's everything is so it's like I'm learning this so deeply. You know, I bet as I get older I'll learn it even deeper, but everything is about holding the paradox. And I love that we are talking about Eckhart, you know, because I have such a fond place in my heart for that, really opening me up in the beginning. And then, of course, Mary Magdalene enters because I feel like so much of my journey has been, you know, you're talking about the thoughts, right? The
Mhm.
limitations, our limited bodies, our limited physical bodies, and then our higher selves in the background witnessing our limitless bodies, our infinite spiritual
Yes.
selves. And so much of my journey was fighting between the two, you know, and it's a conversation between like transcendence, which is like, you know, transcending the body, but also immanence, which is like all of Mary Magdalene's teachings, which is about descending into the body, into
Being
this
human.
physical body and fully embracing the spirituality of being fully human with our
Mm.
limitations. And so I kind of love that we have Eckhart and Mary Magdalene to
Yes.
represent that paradox that, but like we need both the masculine and the feminine, both
Yeah.
transcendence and immanence.
It's so interesting to notice in the world of wellness and spirituality that, like I started learning about coaching through the Dharma Coaching Institute like a couple years ago, and it was a beautiful container, but I really had a hard time stepping into this title of coach, and it felt icky for me, and I'm still working through some parts of that. And it's just really interesting because there's so much nuance in that field, but I find that you either have like an extreme teacher that's like it's all spirit, or an extreme teacher that it's like it's all science, or it has to be materialized. And yet everything you said about it has to be both is so true. And that's something that I've noticed now in this stage of my life. It's like none of the like all of the things I learned are so valuable because it helps me refine and sort of pick and choose like what stood out for me and where I want to go deeper and what I want to leave behind. And I'm only starting to see now after the practice of being deeply with this work, starting from when I want to say it was before my son was conceived, so about 4 years ago. And I'm only starting now noticing it take shape in my life. And it's like, in order for me to be with it, it's asking me to sort of take an audit and notice the relevance of everything that brought me up to this point.
Mm,
And the power of it's not about being just in the mind or just in the heart. It's actually really important to allow them to be in conversation, and
mm-hmm,
that the unification of the both is far stronger than leading from its individual parts. And I
mm-hmm.
feel like that's such a macrocosm or a microcosm for all of life. Like we think that it's all like separation. Like if you look at Western medicine, there's a specialist for everything and there's a time and place. And if you look at like if you're going to treat one organ and then disregard how that impacts the rest of the system that requires that organ, and how hard, sorry, there's just a lawnmower going by, but how hard all of the other parts now have to work in order to support that piece, you can connect that to like community and family systems and gardening, like the
Mm-hmm.
way through which we plant our garden, anything, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I love so much about Mary Magdalene Revealed, this book that Tammy and I have connected so deeply on. But there's so much about this book, and I have chills in this hand as I hold it, but I love that she places emphasis on the divinity of being wholly human. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
before I even came across this book, I was working with this beautiful human. Her name is Jasmine Nina, and we talked about, I was saying to her how like I didn't actually realize my whole divinity until I allowed my whole humanity. Like you
Mm.
almost need to be willing, not almost, you have to be fully willing to allow your whole human experience to even tap into the power of the soul and the spirituality and the divinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk about Mary Magdalene.
Yes. I know. And it's like it goes back to that feeling of choosing this life, like of my soul choosing to inhabit in a human body. Because it's like, why would I choose like a life of suffering and trauma and to experience all this stuff? And it's like, because as a soul, my soul was kind of like, all right, this is cool, like everything's good. It's like kind of when a goldfish is born in water, it doesn't know what water is, it doesn't appreciate water
Hmm.
until you take it out. And then it's like, okay, take me back to the water. And no worries. Should I pause?
No, you could go on.
Okay, cool. Um,
The goldfish in the water doesn't know it's the water.
yeah. And that's kind of the whole premise of, well, Mary Magdalene's gospel, which was ripped out of the Bible. Her teachings are all about how we need to be in the body, that we get to experience grief and loss and pain, because that also shows us how much we have the capacity to love.
Yeah.
And, there's just so much beauty in that when we can accept that life has a lot of suffering. And so, in some ways, yeah, it sucks because now I'm like, well, why did I start this whole spiritual journey? I thought I was going to escape and transcend the body. And then I was like, going to reach a point and I was going to be perfectly happy all the time?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's just not going to happen for anybody. Like, I'm going to continue being hurt. I'm going to continue being heartbroken. I do want to be a mother. And at some point, my child is going to need to individuate from me. And that's going to be painful,
Mm.
right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so then, what if I stop fighting that because it's inevitable? And I finally start accepting and I finally start living this life like the short timeline and holy gift it is.
Yeah. So much of that rings true. And what you said about in my child individuating, like downstream when you become a mama and like realizing that your child, yes, they come through you, but they actually belong to themselves and the world. And there's so much she speaks to in this book about surrender too. And Megan Watterson, who's the author, she's amazing. I love how she speaks to like, sorry, this fucking
It's okay.
lawnmower. Oh my God.
Suffering.
I could hear Mary
Sorry,
Magdalene
this
say,
is
like, you're good, like, go on. But yeah, what Megan Watterson says about surrender and just like what you were saying, how it's inevitable and that we do go on. Like it's so much bigger than what we think the pain is about. And there's a thought that's coming through right now, but it's just struggling to come out. Oh yeah, and it's like when we speak to healing and everything you were saying about your story earlier about healing, and I was saying how it's nuanced because everyone experiences healing different, like when I started dabbling into the wellness world, what I noticed a lot was like this icky feeling language that was like, if you follow this protocol, you'll get $1 million, or if you follow this protocol, you will be healed and transcended. And like, maybe some of that is true. And what if healing is just unshaming? And what if healing is knowing that, yes, you are going to come up against edges and you're going to come up against challenges. All of that is out of our control to a big degree. And what if healing simply means we cultivate a different relationship with self so that when those things do come up, we become empowered instead of thinking we need to outsource ourselves to gain power. And in a sense, that becomes this place where we actually give up control and be in reciprocity with life instead of needing to have control. And if you actually notice the points through which you need control of your life, saying this for myself, it's usually when I need something to go a certain way because I'm afraid of losing something, or I'm afraid that I'm not going to get something. And it's like when I get into that place in my life, it's like saying I know better than God or life or source, whatever your word is, right? So I find that really interesting. And I just want to seg into one of the chapters that like super stood out for me, and it was the judgment one. Do you remember that one?
Can you remind me?
I wonder if I dog-eared it, but she talks about judgment being like this place through which the power to judge. I'm going to read this little passage, but it says, when we judge, we oppress ourselves, or we continue the work of the oppressor. If we've been terrorized or traumatized into silence, we silence ourselves from within before we even dare to speak. And there's no judgment for how long each of us needs to stay silent. It's taken me years to write about Mary Magdalene because I constantly judge everything I wrote as not good enough. This power to judge keeps us in our place. It keeps us small and bottled up. It keeps us contained, restricted to the same pathways that have existed before. This is what silences us from within us. This power to judge, if it remains unrecognized, is what keeps us from ever really expressing the truth of who we are. And oof, that one, like, okay, so much of this book, like, took my heart and wrapped it up and gave it a giant like hugging relief. But for me, that really spoke to like judging myself when I write a piece, because I love to write, and I can't say I'm a writer, but I am a writer. I'm a writer and I love writing. And it's like that self-judgment only continues to weave the thread of that belief I inherited when I was little, thinking that I needed to be a certain way in the eyes of my caregivers, whoever was like influencing me at the time or caring for me at the time, that I needed to be a certain way to have their love or to be accepted and enough. And when I sit with this and notice what comes up through my body and like accepting myself and feeling the spaciousness it creates, and just like the expansion, like I'm closing my eyes and I'm feeling into it. It feels like I can't believe I waited this long to come across, like, to not judge myself, essentially. And I just read this chapter 2 days ago, but I want to say, like, I feel like it's going to completely shift the trajectory of my work and how I approach it. So I'm curious for you. Sorry, lawnmower's coming in.
No, yeah.
How does that, like, tell me about the judge for you?
Oh my God. It's so funny too. Sorry, side note, like Mary Magdalene, like my friend just went on a pilgrimage to her cave too, and I did. But like anytime there's like Mary Magdalene involved, there's like some kind of hardship. And so this lawnmower is like so on point, you know. She's like just reminding you to be in the
Yeah.
body and the limitations of your physical plane. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, I feel like it's like inviting us to go deeper, like
Mhm.
I really have to like be
You will
present.
not silence me.
You will not silence me. Yes.
Yes.
But yeah, the judge.
The judge, God, that fierce inner critic, basically the judge, the inner critic, or Sarah Payton's work is like I've learned so much from Sarah Payton. She's all about
Mm,
relational neuroscience and the different parts of the brain, and she also does nonviolent communication and family constellations. And her
okay, yeah.
teachings have been so crazy impactful for me because it is that marriage of science and spirituality. And so like just to give a little bit of background for my internal judge, like, you know, rewind back to high school, my thoughts and speech patterns were always self-deprecating. It was always like, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so worthless, you know, over and over again, internally and externally.
Mm,
And then throughout high school, you know, even I just remember thoughts of like, I want to die, I want to die, I don't know if it was like I don't deserve to be here. It's just like I'm completely unworthy of love. Like I'm invisible. Like there's no
mm,
point. on repeat, on loop. And then, starting to heal through Eckhart Tolle and food as medicine, and starting to reclaim some self-worth, it started to shift into a little bit more driven by that success mindset, that we start with in the spiritual world, like you said, like, I need
Yeah.
to get to the goal. I need to ascend. So then it was a little bit like love and light narrative, almost like a little bit spiritual bypassing of like, there's just the affirmations the sticker affirmations that you slap on top of all the pain and the trauma and the wounding. And you're like, that'll fix it. That's a good Band-Aid.
I'll affirm my way out of this. I'll just say my
Exactly.
affirmations and ignore what my body's telling me.
Right. And that's half the battle. And
Mm.
then I think really, starting to do the somatic therapy, that's what started really changing the narratives, because 80% of the messages that go between the brain and the body actually go from the body to the brain. That's kind of insane if you think about it. So if like my body is still holding all of that trapped constriction and trauma, it's sending messages to my brain that I'm unsafe, which then create those stories of like, you're not safe, you're not lovable, you're ugly, you're stupid, all these things, so that I can do something about it and be
Yeah.
safe again. But being driven by, where it really started. And I think that kind of kept me in. Have you read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron?
I have not fully, but I mean that book comes into my life all the time.
Yeah, same. She
And
talks
I've
about
done like
shadow.
morning
Oh no,
pages.
my headphones just died. Let me just take it off. Oh no, somebody's calling me. Why is somebody calling me? Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? What was I saying?
Julia Cameron,
Oh, Julia
artist way.
Cameron. In the Artist Way, she talks about shadow artists, and shadow artists are people who want to write or want to do their art or sing or whatever, and often they marry real artists, or
Hmm.
they are surrounded by a lot of artists, but they themselves, for whatever reason, are like, oh, I can't do that. I've never made anything original, or like they have all these excuses, and that's that judgment part running the show. And so
Mm.
they find themselves like close to the source, like they might work and be an assistant of an amazing artist, but they themselves are never the artist. And
Wow.
that was a huge part of my journey as well, because I was in my 6-year relationship, I was dating an actor, and I was so like behind the scenes, and he was kind of the face of our creative business. And I just had all these stories about myself that was like, I'm not original enough, or I'm not talented enough, I'm not pretty enough, all of these things. And I think, I moved through a lot of that to even get to the point of starting Somatic Spirit.
Mm.
And I think a huge part of that was leaving that relationship, realizing like, this isn't what I want, because I do want a child and that's not happening in this relationship. And then I'm sure you can resonate with this, but there's nothing like a spirit baby looming in your field to set a fire under your ass to do things, because suddenly there's something way bigger than you to
Yeah.
work for.
Have you read Spirit Baby? Side note.
I started it.
It's so interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go on, love.
And so honestly, starting Somatic Spirit and starting to put myself online, which was an entire uphill battle on its own that my Vedic astrologer really pushed me into, because I was so resistant to it, because it triggered all of my body dysmorphia, all of my fears of rejection,
Wow.
that I was like, I will absolutely fucking not ever do that. Like, no, there's no way I'm putting myself online. Are you kidding? He nudged me, and then at the end of a 45-minute breathwork meditation at a retreat, I had a vision of myself like talking on a reel, and I was like, no, God, I really can't do that, And that was that judge. It was like, and then I was like, okay, I'm committing to doing it, because, my Vedic astrologer really whipped my ass. And then all of the resistance came up in such crazy ways, like in that dark night of the soul, with all the triggers of like body dysmorphia and everything coming up right before I'm
Mm.
about to really put myself out there to do the thing that I want to do. I fell into this like freeze, spiraling thoughts, depression, and I got it in my head that I absolutely need to get a nose job and cheek reduction surgery before I put myself online. Isn't that insane? Like this is like the, like Adriana and Harshita, my teachers, like they call it kind of like when you're being possessed. There's sometimes these like dark entities, Of course, these are protectors for us, but when it gets to a point where it's really taking over your life, it could feel like this being possessed by a dark entity. And that's really what I felt like, because I had done all this work to get to this point, to finally start helping other people. And here I was literally calling plastic surgeons, having a consult call, figuring out the price. It was going to be 40 grand. So I was like, great, I'll use all my manifesting powers to manifest 40 grand. Fucking surgery. Oh my God. And then, it was again the dichotomy of like, whoa, higher self is back here like, dude, what are we doing?
Oh my God.
And physical body here is like, ego's like, no, I'm never giving up this protection. I'm never getting rid of this story. It's like it was an ego death, I think, of a
Yes.
really strong part of me that protected me for a long time. But yeah, I feel like that self-judgment part is so strong. And then, you know, there was a certain point in that, like I would say 3 weeks to 2 months of freeze. I don't even remember. It was such a warp that the pain was so unbearable. Like it just felt like endless thought loops. I couldn't sleep. I was so consumed with this. I couldn't work during that time. I remember like being in the bathtub one night and I was like, this pain is so unbearable. How will I live this way if I have this insane part of my psyche? I'm going to continue aging as a woman. My body's going to change. I want babies. How, like, if this is what's happening right now, how am I going to live? And I like put my head underwater. I don't think I was fully committed to leaving this earth, but it was one of
Right.
those like, let me entertain the feeling of what that would be like to escape my
Mm.
pain this way. And then in the water, I remember it was just so uncomfortable. And then that's when, like, I really felt like I heard the voice of my womb come through. And she was
Wow.
like, there must be another way. And that was a huge turning point for me. And I feel like that was kind of like that surge of fight mode, after your system's been in freeze for so long, there's an activation that happens if you'll accept
Mhm.
it. And from there, that was like, okay, well, I enrolled in these like erotic dance classes. I started taking responsibility for my disowned sexuality that I was like projecting onto my partner and all of this stuff. I'm like, okay, well, my sexual trauma has kept me inhibited all these years. I'm going to get reconnected to my own sexuality. So I started doing erotic dance. I started doing mirror work for my body image. I started, just getting even deeper and deeper into what the fuck was this possession of my entire self, this
Yeah.
criticism and judgment. And all of those practices, modalities, and like healing through that somatically is really what birthed Awakening the Wild Woman. So that's that's the long answer for the judgment. It's big for me.
Yeah, the judge is big. It is really big. And it just makes me think about, like everything you said, I'm sure every woman can connect with to some degree, whether big or small. But it's like hard enough that unattainable standard of beauty that exists in our world today is one is such that in order to be beautiful, we either have to not age or, you know, need this product or this procedure to be done in order to stay the same and freeze, which there's a difference between stillness and like this
Collapse.
type of frozen. I want to say like you're trying to stay exactly the same. And I remember interviewing one of my first guests. Her name was Tahiti, and she's like her favorite saying was "evolve or die." And it's true. Like you're either evolving or you literally are going through an ego death in which the pillars through which you are experiencing your life, they have to die. These beliefs you're carrying that keep you away from the expansion of life and just in your place no longer can bring you to the place that you are having that sense of feeling of growing. And it's just really interesting because I don't know if you ever read Wayne Dyer, but he always saw ego as etch God out. So it's like you're etching God out of your life. You're like etching that which is like the
Mm,
bigger essence and field around, and you're keeping that away and trying to control a thing. And it's interesting how when we cling to those beliefs create our availability. And then if that belief creates an availability as such that you have to remain in a myopic perspective of life, that you need XYZ to be, or in order to perform or create your art or share it with the world, then it actually perpetuates the same energy that you're trying to avoid. So it's just wild how the judge is full of fuckery. Like it wants to
Totally.
protect us, and at some point we could say, I don't need you to be driving the wheel anymore. You can be
Right.
here, but I'm more powerful. And now this empowerment I feel is paling in comparison to what power I thought you gave me from outside myself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And then I feel like all of somatic work is really about alchemizing and transmuting these parts and learning actually, because most of us, I think, can identify. A lot of us can identify where we control, and then we end up hating those parts of ourselves. You know, I was like, why is this demon and like just taking over my body? Get away. I fucking hate this little 16-year-old. Like, stop it. You're ruining my life. And then the beauty comes in alchemizing and learning how to bring her in and celebrate her and like get on the
Yeah.
same team. And then she kind of like becomes older, and then she's like, whoa, I have a different role now. I can help you in a different way. And
Yeah.
so it's like bringing those parts back in rather than trying to push them away.
Totally. And that's what I love about somatic healing. It's like you're not trying to eradicate something, you're just learning to have a different relationship with your body. And
Mm.
like a lived experience example of this could be like, culturally, we're not really taught to celebrate our period. Like it's really rare for me to meet someone where they got their first bleed and they had a ritual and it was celebrated and it was like made to be a big
Mm.
deal. And then we're like the rest of our life, like I know for myself, I like hid tampons up my sleeve, or I didn't want to go out if I had my period, but I'd go out anyway because I didn't want to like have FOMO, or
Mm.
I'd be embarrassed to say like I'm having this certain pain or discomfort. Like we didn't talk about our period. And now being at the stage of my life that I'm in and learning all that I have about the power of the womb and how it can be a barometer through which we experience our life, I'm just really blown away by how bringing that 12-year-old self of me back into my life and reigniting the superpower that we can now intersect with together and understand the magic of cyclical living, the magic of knowing that we are nature, the magic of understanding that like our blood is it's life force. It's
Mm. Yeah.
everything. And I really love that, because we speak to this in terms of archetypes, but there's so many, it's the both and again, like the human and the divine, and bringing that to the world, materialize, and knowing that there's so many examples in our life this day where, like for example, if you're someone that had an eating disorder and you're counting calories, well, you can bring her back and just together learn to have a different relationship with food and like
Yeah.
learn to eat intuitively. And
Right.
it's not someone that we're shaming, like she just wanted to protect you.
Right.
So yeah, I just find it so
Right.
interesting.
I love that. Like they are living beings inside of us, the 12-year-old, the 16-year-old, the 21-year-old. And I love that you talk about, I was 12 too when I
Oh,
first
were
had my
you?
period. Yeah. And yeah, Adriana Rieselo, my teacher, she has us speak about our first periods, our first bleeds,
Mm.
and it's like illuminating when you recount that story and you can tell it to somebody and it can be held. And I'm like, whoa, so many stories and beliefs and patterns manifested from just that one experience.
Yeah.
Can I tell
Right?
you? Can I tell you about my first bleed?
Yes. Yes.
It's a story that I like told a lot jokingly, which I realize is so much of my pattern. Sometimes, like, I've told traumatic stories throughout my life in this comedic way as a way of deflecting. And then when I like go through them in somatic therapy, I'm like, that's so sad. I can't believe that happened. But I was on a snowboard trip. My mom skis. So I was taking a lesson with another group. And so I was kind of alone and I was really shy. And I had like a big crush on the ski instructor who was British. And I remember going to the well, what happened first was I was getting off the ski lift, and it's so awkward on a snowboard because you have like one foot out and one foot attached to your board, and you're like trying to like meander yourself sideways down a hill. And my binding, like the foot thing that holds your foot in, was up on my board, and as I was sliding down the hill I like kind of fell over and lost my balance, and I squatted straight down onto the binding. And so I like that was so painful, I like basically like bruised my vagina, and it was like like oh my god, it was so terrifying. And I didn't say anything to him, I just like kept all that pain in because I was too embarrassed,
Yeah.
to tell this guy I had a crush on what just happened. So I just went to the restroom, and I was like horrified to see blood. And I figured, oh my God, I just started my period. Like this, there's nothing that could be worse than this. I can't believe I started my period. I have a huge crush on this guy and I'm alone. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I don't know. Just like wrap up a bunch of, you know, towels, tissues, and just like pretend it never happened. And then I go out there and I shove my pain down and I put on my good girl smiley face, and I'm in pain for the rest of the time because I think I did start my period, and also like I did cut my poor yoni, and bruise it. But like
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? Like think of the messages there of like put the man first. Like be beautiful. Like that's the most important thing. Shove away
Ignore
your
your pain.
pain.
Yeah.
Ignore your pain, your needs, your womanly wisdom, all
Silence
in
your voice.
service, silence my
Your
voice,
truth.
all in service to remain attractive for this man.
Mm.
And wow, the ways that has rippled out into my life. Obviously, not just that one incident, it's like ancestral, but isn't that, it's big.
It's so big. And I mean, my story is not as exciting as yours was, but I love how you notice all the different ways that could play out in our life. And it's still very real for so many women. Like, so many women I've worked with are, including myself, I've only come to this into my late 30s. I'm in my 40s now, but like, I didn't start until my body had to get loud in order for me to hear it. And one of my amazing teachers, Usha Anandi, she says that pain is an acronym for pay attention inside now.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And that's always stuck with me. And it's like that edge that I was pushed up against became this place of transitional choices where I could choose to either ignore it again, or I could like jump off this cliff. And yes, everything was unknown from there, but it was like it sort of became this initiation into a journey of what has connected me so deeply with women's work, with the power of women and the womb and just the body in general for every human. And I want to speak to Awaken the Wild Woman because I know you brought that up when you were telling the story of the judge. And I know this ties in beautifully with everything we explored. I would love to hear more about it because Awaken the Wild Woman is an offering that you are going to launch, I believe, this month in October. And there's still time to sign up. So we're going to share all that in the show notes. But
Well, there might not be by the time this comes out, but that's totally fine. It'll
it'll be
happen
out
again
next
next
week.
year.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's
Actually, I'm
talk about
closing
it now.
enrollments. I'm closing enrollments this Friday, but if anybody listens to this and wants to trickle in before the 18th, I am like starting to send members info and stuff. But, if anybody's listening and
They could
they
DM
want to
you.
reach out. Hmm.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, tell us about Awaken the Wild Woman, and I would love to know. Well, you did explain how it was birthed through your archetype of the judge, but also like how did it birth? Like, was it in you for a long time, and you were aware of its presence, and now it's just ready? Because I know Mary Magdalene talks about like things tend to birth when they're ready to birth, like the chapter about the red egg,
Mm.
how the beginning also contains the end. Okay, but I'm going off on a
Can you
tangent. Let's go back.
tell me about that chapter again?
The red egg, okay, so like in the Gospel of Thomas, also scripture that was removed from the Bible, right? I believe.
I think so.
The red egg is a chapter that speaks to how the end is also the beginning. And there's a quote that opens from the Gospel of Thomas where it's, and this to me, the red egg speaks to the continuum of life. And that when we are inspired, when we conceive, it's the timing of that which is coming through us is not up to us. And so I have found this to be true in my creative journey as well as in conception. You could be given a guest date, they call it a due date, but a guest date. And that baby rarely, like both mine didn't come on their like given dates, and most of what I create creatively comes in far before I let it out, but I allow it to come through in that moment. But before it comes out in the world, it takes time, and some don't because I'm afraid and I have these fears I want to work through. So the red egg talks, I just want to read this passage. Can I read it?
Yeah, of course.
It's, you have to remain in this trusting, quiet unknown, as every mother or artist knows, and let that life declare its existence, and not when your ego says it's time, but when the new life is ready. A body, like an egg, contains a soul. In the beginning, there's the dark, there's the womb, and the only light is the soul, this new life that awaits to emerge from within. The soul is the beginning and also the end. Birth is meant to happen before we die, ideally many times, but we have to die to the ego to let it. The more the soul rises, resurrects in this life, the more love is present here inside us, meaning the soul is all we are when we come into this life, and it's all that will be when we leave it. If you can stand there at the beginning, then you'll know the end, which is a love that only ever expands.
So beautiful. It's really just
I
speaking
love
to
it.
the cycles of death and rebirth, right?
Yeah. And there's the lawnmower.
Of course, of course. Anytime we try to talk about Mary Magdalene.
But, circling back to Awaken the Wild Woman, I would love to hear how it came to life. And the red egg really, it just, I can weave that into so much of life, not just actual,
Yeah.
like figuratively birthing life, but tell me more
Yeah.
about Awaken the Wild Woman.
So I think at first when I was trying to launch it like 2 or 3 years ago, I was a little bit on my capitalist agenda. Like I need to create a course. I need to put all of my stuff that I know and I've learned from somatics into a course now to expand my business, right? And just like she said, if you crack the egg shell, how can I expect there to be a little beak that pops out? And I just kept delaying it and delaying it. Like I would set this like launch date and then all my shit would come up where I would be scared and I would contract and things weren't ready and I broke my computer screen, like all this stuff. And I remember like my launch, that first launch probably went on for a year of like, sorry guys, pushing it back 3 months, now 6 months. Okay, now I'm finally ready to launch it. And so I did it last year, and there were 11 women. And I don't know how to describe, well, I feel like the process of putting out any launch or program, I get initiated into it deeply. It's like God puts me in the ringer of what the hell I'm trying to teach. And it can be so disorienting. Like the first time around, it was so disorienting because I'm trying to be linear and masculine and have structure and have modules and teach. But at the same time, like my entire emotional body is being unwound and I'm being forced to be put through my body of work, as my practitioner Ali Bogard tells me. But I think that that process, if you will allow yourself to be put through, like I feel like I learned through my own course, and I feel like Awakening the Wild Woman evolves with me as I evolve as a human and what I have to offer. And last year, it was so much of my medicine was about showing the non-Instagram side of spirituality, which is deep pain and processing and being witnessed in that and being held and being loved in that womb space when you're transforming like that. And it was so ironic because I started out teaching that. And towards the end, that's when my sweet baby girl Nala passed away. And the
Mm.
last closing ceremony of Awakening the Wild Woman, like I just had to show up. I was in tears. I was like broken open, you know?
Mm.
And the woman that I had led for 6 months were holding me in my grief. And I was like, this is like the most beautiful
Oh
full
my
circle
goodness.
moment, right? And like all throughout the course, I'm talking about how important it is that I'm not just the teacher. I'm not here lecturing you. Like, we need to
Mm.
dismantle that patriarchal idea of authority and wisdom. And I just thought that was so beautiful, kind of like the egg, you know, of like suddenly, you know, my students are my teachers too.
Yeah.
And so that's my testimonial for awakening the wild woman. You know, it's like I felt so deeply held in my process of this
Yeah.
container of these women and myself. I healed relationally so much because I'm so used to throughout my childhood processing my own pain by myself. And I didn't even realize, you know, that's just like such a response that I have, even though I had wonderful people reaching out to me, like a friend after I got back from Nala's death who was like, "Do you want a hug?" And I really wanted to just be held and I wanted to like bawl in his arms. But the
Mm.
second he held me, I was like frozen stiff. Like I
Mm.
couldn't access it.
Yeah.
And I feel like you know, the past 6 to 8 months have been so hard to heal from the loss of Nala or whatever. And I'm getting to Awakening the Wild Woman this year, but this is an important part of it. And, you know, I had all kinds of health stuff come up, the candida, UTIs, all the gut stuff happening, like just stuck in grief and depression from losing her because she was like my most secure attachment. Dogs have always been my most secure attachment up
Mm.
until now. And, you know, I went on my pilgrimage this summer to Joan of Arc and also Mary Magdalene's cave. And I, you know, the journey to Mary Magdalene's cave was just full of like hilarious hardship. I went with my friends Kate and Marcia, and you know, we had to like get up early and all of this stuff leading up to it. And then we also had a photo shoot. Marcia, my friend, she does wild woman photo shoots and she'll be teaching and awakening the wild woman as well. And I've wanted to do a photo shoot with her for like 2 years because of the way she captures this essence, this
Mm.
raw nature of the wild woman. And so there was so much writing on this, and that photo shoot was, we were supposed to get up at 4 a.m. the next day to go do that. So everything felt like in a time crunch, and even like getting to the Mary Magdalene caves, it was like so chaotic in Marseille. Like almost got into like a few accidents, and then like the car that I was driving, it was so strange. It just like kept beeping. You know when you have a car that is like, I think that car had like complex PTSD because it had an alarm for everything. If I went 1 mile above the speed limit, it had an alarm. If like somebody, if the seatbelt wasn't plugged in, it had an alarm. Like so, it was beeping nonstop, and we couldn't figure out like all the way to the caves. And I was even joking. I like had my hand on it, and I was trying to like heal it relationally. And I was like, "How does it feel that I'm here with you, and that you're not alone? I understand you're really afraid." You know, it was like hilarious, like the number of things that were going wrong. And finally, we do make it up to the caves, and I'm kneeling there in front of her in the cave at one point to this beautiful, gorgeous, I think it was like the statue of her holding Jesus or holding the cross, you know, after her loss of her beloved. And I was just like praying, and I was like, please just tell me what I need to know. And, you know, up until then, that trip was not easy too. I was like I couldn't my sorry, I'm like dissociating right now talking about it, but I was experiencing like confusion, like
Mm.
brain fog, insomnia. I just was so not good in my body physically, and it was really frustrating because I had been looking forward to this trip for so long, and you expect it to be like Instagram magic, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm just like on my knees in front of her. I'm like, tell me what I need to know. Like, please, like, give me some guidance. Oh my God, the lawnmower.
Seriously, you cannot make this shit
I
up.
know. and and I just waited in silence, and then I heard her say, and I saw this image in my mind of an egg, but like shaped like a heart. If you could imagine a heart-shaped egg,
Hmm.
and she said, "Let it break you." And then I saw like
Ooh, chills.
the heart crack in the middle with the yolk like melting out of it.
Wow.
And in the moment, I was resistant because I was like, I've been grieving for so long. I've been doing that. And then after that, when we were in the car driving back, of course, me and my best friend Kate, we got into our trigger that we've had for 22 years of our life, and it started conflict. And I broke down, and I realized like I've been holding it all together. I've been giving people the sweet, put together after processing version of my pain.
Mm.
And in that car ride, I was babbling and like hiccuping and like like gasping for air through my tears and speaking like a child. I was like, I don't know, it's just, everything's so hard, and like, why does, like letting it all out. And I was like, but I have the photo shoot tomorrow, and how am I going to do it in this state? And then Marsha and Kate are like, Tammy, this is the essence of what you teach. This is why it's happening, because God doesn't want you to capture the picture perfect version of yourself, the good girl that you're helping people heal from. They want this.
Yeah.
And, and it was such this profound moment of like everything that I preach that I forget in my own life sometimes, of like the power of community. I can't do it alone. I cannot grieve alone. It needs to be held, and I need to let it
Mm.
break me, and I need to be able to rely on my sisters or my community to remind me what the medicine is. And so then we had the photo shoot, and instead of like the picture perfect, like, you know, capture me put together as a practitioner photos that I wanted, which that's some of it. We also captured the pain. I got to be in the real, deep, raw emotions of my loss and of feeling broken open. And during this time, I also was really separated from my mom, so I was really processing that as well.
Mm.
Not to mention the loss of, I shared this dog with my past 6-year relationship, so it was kind of like a grieving of
Yeah.
many endings all at once that I couldn't speak out loud online about because I wasn't ready. And
Hmm.
also, I want to protect the privacy of, my family and my ex. Um, and I don't know, that was just like a beautiful culmination of what got captured that day. And that was like the true initiation. And this time around with Awakening the Wild Woman, I feel finally like really landed into being able to embody being enough, like letting my
Mm.
presence being enough, like actually embody not being the doing, but just it's how I am, it's who I am. And so, yeah, this year is also incorporating a lot of what I've healed through, which is performance, art, poetry, song, dance, um, because there's so many parts in us that are frozen, that are pre-verbal from a very young age, that
Totally.
can't, we can't speak to what's going on there. They're just frozen parts of us that can only sometimes be felt and seen through art, which activates that relational right hemisphere of the brain, which is the part of our brain that is responsible for connectivity, relationality, creativity. And so I'm bringing in a lot of experts for that, dark goddess initiations, reclaiming sacred sexuality, bringing in yourself as our woman's
Boom
womb
circle.
facilitator. Yeah,
Yeah.
women's womb circle. And then, my voice coach to help us find our authentic, intuitive voice and break free of that fear of sometimes even just hearing yourself speak. I used to, have that judge be like, oh my God, I don't sound smart enough, and all of those ways that we freeze ourselves up and keep our truth in because that judgment is running the show. And then in between the guest experts, I'm holding space for, it's really a live group experience where I'm relationally responding to what's alive for each of the women in the group. And it's very intuitive. It's, a mixture of body temple dance facilitation and somatic experiencing, which is like a trauma healing modality. and attachment repatterning, and doing all kinds of like writing and healing through sharing ourselves vulnerably with each other, and going into breakout rooms, doing relational exercises, kind of healing from the mother father wound and reconnecting to the source energy of the divine mother, the source of the divine father, and also really starting to individuate and face forward in our family line, face forward in our ancestral line, so that we can now take what we've been given and move forward, rather than be stuck looking back up the family line and stuck in our pain. Because I really feel like each of us women has so much medicine to share.
Oh, I love that so much. I'm just going to take a pause there and breathe into just all the beauty that you just shared, from how this baby was birthed to your own experience of embodying it. And it sounds like such a nourishing offering. And I know that it's a longer container, right? It's like is it a 9-month journey?
6 months.
6 months, sorry, 6 months. And, there's a part in Mary Magdalene Revealed where she speaks to her journey, her pilgrimage going to Scotland with Christiane Northrup and one of her other besties. And what you shared about your own pilgrimage just reminds me so much of her own story, of how like there were so many like things they tripped up upon before even getting to where she wanted to go, down to where she like walks into this building. I believe it was a church, like a historic church, and she's kneeling at the altar, and she's just like receives this powerful message. And do you remember that part in the book?
I have like the worst memory, but
It so mirrors what you said, and I really loved that for you, especially. It makes me want to I want to go on that pilgrimage.
yes, please come next
And
time.
yes, I know this is only the beginning of our connection. And then lastly, I just want to say too, to awaken the wild woman, I've never heard it described in that way before. I've only read about it, and obviously it appealed to me from like our own conversations behind the scenes, and just like getting to know you more and more, and just really seeing what such a beautiful human you are. The theme throughout the book of Mary Magdalene Revealed that is weaved is this notion of we can't do it alone. That there is this unification, and that there's this community, and there's this part where she learns how to honor the divine God or love. And it starts by like honoring the mind, and then the heart, and then the we. So the me to we to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that to me stands out about Awaken the Wild Woman, how you mentioned they ended up holding you. So it's almost
Yeah.
as if what you're teaching is also teaching you.
Oh my
And when you're
God, so
dismantling
much.
that, yeah, that hierarchical structure, it's like now we can meet womb to womb and heart to heart. Like we're the same, like we're so interconnected. We are nature. We're in all. We are
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really excited for the listeners that get to hear this conversation, and the women that get to weave with you through your work and experience. And one thing I truly, truly admire about you is that you understand the significance of the medicine of embodying the work, and maybe not so much by choice at the start, but also allowing life to take you and be like, oh, yeah, you want to offer this up? Okay, well, first we're going to put you through it, because I can
Mm-hmm.
relate to that on so many levels. And whew, it really does. It's, it's like buckle up because
Mm-hmm.
you said it so beautifully. Like God doesn't want you to like present the good girl complex. It's
Mm-hmm.
the raw, the beauty and the terror, the just life can be so devastatingly beautiful sometimes. Just look
Right,
at
totally.
what and just look at how Mother Nature is expressing herself right now in various parts of the world, and just what's happening on the globe. So I just really want to hand over heart thank you for everything you shared and for your light in the world. And one thing I'm taking away from this conversation is just the power of going back to that judge piece. But if we choose not to run with the judge, we then get to choose the love and light that is weaving through our work. And yeah, it's not all love and light. It's really not. And that is the piece of us that wants to come alive through the mud. And I just really, I love that that is evident in your work. And it really inspires me to look at how I can, expand my perspective up to this point and this real time conversation in which I can be with more of that part of myself versus letting the judge run the show. And I just love you for it. And I just really want to thank you. And I'm excited for what's to come for you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, the last part I'll say of that is, you know, maybe sometimes we want to just let the judge run the show because that feels safe, but often it's because the task in front of us looks so daunting and scary. Like, how am I going to embrace all my grief and rage and pain or whatever? But actually, when we find safe places to land, like Awakening the Wild Woman or different communities where that's normalized, it gets so much easier because, when I'm talking to my mom and she's like, "Don't be sad about Nala. Like, there's so much more you have." And I'm like, "Oh my God." It's so triggering, because it was such
Yeah.
my upbringing of cutting off the whole part of me that is actually my medicine.
Hmm.
So then it's like, I need to find the people like you. I need to find my community where this is normalized so that it's actually easier to step forward in my medicine. Where, sure, I
Hmm.
might be experiencing rejection, my whole family, whole part of the world might not like me, but there's this part that's safe and there's this part that does get me. And it makes it way easier for us to choose, okay, goodbye, judge. That's not what I'm going to live by anymore. I'm marching forward.
I love that. So before we sign off, I would just love it if you could let everyone know where they could find you or connect with you in case they find themselves like, I got to join Awaken the Wild Woman for a limited
Yeah.
time, if that's possible.
Yeah, for last minute listeners, you can find me on Instagram at Somatic Spirit and also on TikTok. And my website is www.somatic-spirit.com. And you could find the Awakening the Wild Woman page on my website where you can book a call with me.
Beautiful. We'll attach all that information in the show notes. Thank you again so much, Tammy, for being with me today. I so appreciate you.
Thank you so much. This was so special. And I can't wait to have you in Awakening the Wild Woman.
Yes, I can't wait either. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.